a collective security alliance. You, as our country's chief architect of our foreign policy, are you going to make the Philippines as a member of the Quad? Why and why not?
Professor Carlos's question will be addressed to Secretary Norberto Gonzales first.
Well, we will always be part of arrangements like that. And yes, it's important. Dapat lagi kasi may mga kasama tayo kung may mga hiharap tayo mga problema sa mundo. Kaya kailangan, kung may mga arrangements na ganyan, dapat pinapasok natin.
Secretary Gonzales, if you have nothing to add, the other candidates may react to his answer. I think Secretary Ernie Abella.
Yes. The Philippines needs to retain an independent foreign policy, and in which case it needs to be able to dance between the two great powers. As we can maintain relationships with them, but not to join. However, because we need to be able to maintain that specific independent stance. We can relate with either one, the other one, but at the same time, we need to retain our independence and be able to sustain our own sovereignty. Thank you.
Yeah, but Mr. Abella, remember, you're still linked to the United States of America because of the Mutual Defense Treaty.
That's true.
So the Quad is composed of, well, so-called democracies. And so are you more leaning towards being part of the Quad or some other collective security arrangement?
It's not a question of leading more, but the question of being able to maintain both while maintaining a balance.
Yeah, I have a problem with the concept of independent because it's like you're sitting on the fence. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean to say that we need to be able to make our own stands and be able to make our own decisions without undue influence from anybody.
I don't know that being friends with everybody is foreign policy.
We're not being friends with anybody. We can have trade with the greater power, which is our neighbor. On the other hand, we can maintain our MDTs with the people in Quad.
Yeah, well, the reason why, and this is for all the candidates, I asked this question is that right now I'm sure the big powers are trying to carve their own spheres of influence. And because we've always been within the sphere of influence of the United States of America, the Quad is simply an extension of this proposed collective security arrangement.
On the other hand, they will not always, we can always be sure that they will always stand for us.
Well, of course, nobody can answer that question, even if we ask Biden today, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Marcos?
Yes, I think any of these agreements we should, of course, encourage, as long as it is very clear to us what is the advantage to the Philippines. What the professor just mentioned was she spoke about the great powers trying to carve out spheres of influence. I reject that model that I believe no longer applies in the geopolitics of the modern world. The old Cold War thinking. We have to ply our own way. And so it really would depend on what is inside, or what those agreements say that the Philippines, what will be doing and what those other partners of ours will be doing for the Philippines. And once again, because we shouldn't think of the old Cold War system, we should always think in terms of the fine line that the Philippines has to tread in all our foreign policy decisions.
But if Mr. Marcos, if you reject the concept of spheres of influence, does that mean you're going to scuttle the Mutual Defense Treaty when you become President of the Republic?
By no means.
referring to the United States of America as a defense ally.
No. By no means. The relationship with the United States, our special relationship with the United States is not something that we can treat, be cavalier about. It is a very important one. And it has stood us in good stead for over 100 years. And that, I think, will never disappear from the Philippine psyche, the idea and the memory of what the United States did for us and fought with us in the last war. And so that is a specific part of our foreign policy. But then as we approach, we know that we are a hot spot right now. The West Philippine Sea is a hot spot in geopolitics right now. And that is why we still have to find our own line in terms of all of these arrangements. Except the one simple principle is that we will not cede 1 square inch of the Philippines to any country.
Karen, do I have time for one more follow-up with Mr. Marcos?
Yes, Professor Carlos.
Yeah. Okay. If that is the stance that you have taken, Mr. Marcos, suppose you have a situation where China is trying to, take us in, embrace us within its sphere of influence. How would you react as our chief architect of our foreign policy?
Once again, in terms of specifically to China, the correct approach still seems to be one of engagement. And no matter what the superpowers are trying to do, we have to work in the interest of the Philippines, and we cannot allow ourselves to be part of the foreign policy of any other country. And we have to have our own foreign policy. So again, whatever the superpowers do, we as a highly strategic geographic, are having a highly strategic geographical location in the world, really have to walk that very, very fine line between these great powers who, I always say, these are great powers, we are in between. If they sneeze at the same time, we disappear from the map. And that is something that we always have to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Calyodi, we'll hear from you.
Para sa akin talaga ay maiwasan yung lahat yung pakikipagkaisa dito sa mga malaking bansa sa daigdig na ang relasyon ay gagawin tayong parang pawn lang sa mga kanilang mga labanan. Ang aking naiisip talaga ay maging unaligned ang ating bansa sa mga malaking kapitalistang bansa sa daigdig, tapusin yung ating military agreement sa US, yung Mutual Defense Treaty, yung BFA, yung EDCA, at pati yung relasyon natin sa China na dihado tayo. Makipagkasundo lamang tayo doon sa mga bansa nagagalang sa ating mga karapatan, sa ating soberanya, sa ating territorial integrity, sa ating mga panuntunan.
Any follow-up questions, Professor Carlos?
Yeah, Mr. De Guzman, kung gusto ninyong non-aligned po tayo, ay saan po tayo tutukod? Alam niyo naman ng ating military yung pinakamahina sa buong ASEAN region. So, ito ba ay aspiration mo lang bilang chief executive, or is non-alignment, this is still something that will wash in international politics now?
Non-aligned tayo doon sa mga bansa na magagamit lamang tayo sa kanilang mga interes. Lalo na sa kasalukuyang sitwasyon ngayon na yung China halos at Amerika ay may trade war at nagigirian sila. Huwag na tayong makisangkot sa kanilang girian. Makipag-align tayo sa mga bansa na nagsusulong ng pagkakaisa, kapayapaan at economic ang mas focus ng pagkakaisa at pagtutulungan. At hindi yung papanig sa Amerika o sa China, lalo na sa usapin ng West Philippine Sea na siya ang mainit na usapin sa ngayon. Magagamit lamang tayong pawn ng sino man sa kanila. Kaya dapat makipagkaisa tayo sa mga bansa dito sa Southeast Asia at tayo ay magtulungan para sa ikauunlad ng mamayan. Iwasan natin ang giyera.
Is there any rebuttal from our candidates? I can see Professor Carlos wanting to be part of the debate.
I'm sorry. I hope I'm not dominating the questions, Karen.
No,
You
it's
just
okay.
strike me down, if I need to shut out. Yeah.
Yes, we've budgeted the time. If there are no reactions from the candidates to each other's answers, we are allotting the additional time to follow-up questions from our
Can
panelists.
I just do one follow-up with Mr. De Guzman?
Of course.
Okay. Well, I'm interested in the concept of non-alignment because, I don't know that it's like once upon a time we talked about that. So, sino hong mga bansa kaya ang ating, anong pangalan nila? Ang ating sasamahan? Dahil sinabi ninyo ay sasama tayo sa mga non-aligned countries because most countries have cast their lots with either the United States of America, with Russia, or with PROC. So saan tayo? Diyan lang ba tayo nakaupo sa bakod?
Ang gusto natin ay hindi dependent, kundi isang independent foreign policy at makikipagkasundo tayo. Hindi naman tayo magpuputol, kundi makikipagkasundo tayo sa mga bansa na re-respeto doon sa ating sovereignty at territorial integrity. Mas ganon. At ang mas makakakapit natin sa kasalukuyan, lalo na sa usapin ng West Philippine Sea, ay itong mga Asian country. At yan ang ating makakakampi sa kasalukuyan. At hindi, ayaw ko talaga na pumanig sino man sa kanila, sa Russia, sa China, na nagsusulong lang naman ng kanilang personal na interes at hindi sa interes ng kapayapaan at kaunlaran ng buong daigdig.
Salamat po.
Thank you, gentlemen. If there are no rebuttals for this issue, we can proceed with the next panelist's question. So, no more rebuttals? Okay. Our next question will be coming from Attorney Rolex Suplico. Attorney, your question, please.
Madamong salamat, Karen. Mayong gabi sa tanan. Issue po ng kahit kaninong administrasyon, ang korupsyon, na tinatansyang may epekto sa mahigit kumulang 20% ng budget ng pamalaan kada taon. Ngayong magkakaroon ng bagong Pangulo, kailangan muling iakyat sa talakayan ang pagnanais na matigil ang pangungurakot, sapagkat ang isang malinis na gobyerno ay nagsisimula sa isang tapat at marangal na Pangulo. Kung kayo po ay magiging Pangulo, una, kusa mo bang ilalabas o hindi sa publiko ang iyong SALN or Statement of Assets, Liabilities and Net Worth? At pangalawa, kusa ka bang magsasagawa ng waiver sa mga provision ng RA 1405 na nagbabawal sa pagpaalam sa publiko ng laman ng inyong mga bank accounts?
This question will be first answered by Senator Bongbong Marcos.
Well, sa issue ng pagbigay o ng salin, ay para sa akin, hindi problema yon. At kaya hindi lang ako nagsusulat ng salin for the last 6 years. Pero kung ako'y maging mapalad sa darating na halalan, ay natural, ay kailangan gagawa ng salin at ito ibibigay ko sa publiko paghihingin sa akin. Ngayon, sa aking palagay, yan ang desisyon ko bilang isang individual. Sa aking palagay ay hindi na kailangan palitan ng batas at nasa sa bawat opisyal na yan kung sila ba ay handa na ilabas ang kanilang salin. At siyempre dadagdag ko kung may kaso na may court order na sasabihin ilabas ang salin, ay kailangan talagang ibigay. Pag na-mandate ng isang korte, maliwanag na talagang ibigay at ipalaman. Sa sarili ko lamang, para maging maliwanag, kapag ako ay susulat muli ng salin, ito ay gagawin kong public information.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. If there are no other reactions from any of the candidates to Senator Marcos's answer, we will proceed with Secretary Ernie Abella for the same question.
Yeah, wala pong problema sa akin yun. We just, I comply. There's no question about it.
think short and sweet, Attorney Rolex.
Thank you.
And I assume no reaction from the candidates. Okay, we'll have Calyodi for the same question.
Dapat lang na ilabas, no? Dapat lang ilabas. Ito, walang problema sa akin na ilabas yung SALN at igawing publiko.
Great, another straight to the point answer. And of course, Secretary Norberto Gonzales.
Okay lang na ilabas yan. Pero, alam mo, siguro medyo dagdagan pa natin ng konti. Kasi meron akong nalalaman na sa ibang bansa, hindi lang SALN ng mga public officials ang ipinopubliko. Public na ipinapublish ang lahat ng income tax returns ng buong sambayanan. Maganda siguro ganoon para pantay.
So Karen, follow-up question.
Of course.
Papayag ka bang i-require ang inyong immediate family, asawa at mga anak na ilabas na magperma ng waiver sa provisions ng RA 1405?
Of course. Buong Pilipinas nga gusto kong gumawa niyan eh. Dapat open tayo kung ano ang hinahawakan natin para na sa ganun walang duda. At mas mabilis ang pagkolekta ng taxes. Na tama.
I think we have reactions from Secretary Marcos. Senator Marcos.
Sa aking palagay, kung sino ang nasa batas na sinasabing kailangan sumulat ng SALN, ay kung nasa sa kanya, kung sila ay maglalabas. Ngayon, ang pamilya ko naman ay siguro hindi dahil pamilya ko kailangan magsulat ng SALN at kailangan ilabas. Kaya siguro yung aking sinasabi ay lahat na kung may pamilya man ako na nakaupo na sumusulat ng SALN, ay sa palagay ko handa rin sila na ilabas lahat yan.
I also saw Secretary Abella reacting earlier. Sir, yes.
No, basically, kung sino, kung kailangan, like everybody said, kung sino kailangan maglabas, ilalabas, wala naman kagipitan doon.
Thank you to our candidates. If there are no more reactions, are there any follow-up questions, Attorney Rolex?
No more, Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much to UP Professor Clarita Carlos and Attorney Rolex Suplico. And we've heard from our candidates. SMNI Presidential Debate 2022 will be back.
Gabay para sa tamang pagpili ngayong eleksyon, hatid namin sa inyo itong mga leksyon.
Sino ang dapat na magpatuloy sa pagbabagong nasimulan? Sino ang dapat na mailukno sa kapangyarihan?
Dapat may paninindigang ipagpatuloy ang laban kontra insurhensya at iligal na droga.
Matapang, ngunit may puso, may malasakit, handang magpatawad, tagapagtaguyod ng kapayapaan at pagkakaisa.
Handang isakripisyo ang meron siya, mapunan lang ang kakulangan ng iba. Ang pulso ng taong bayan, nasa sa kanya.
Mautak, madiskarte at alam ang saklaw ng batas. May konkretong solusyon sa bawat problema, lalo na sa gitna ng krisis at pandemya.
Kilalanin mo ang iyong iboboto. Aralin ang plataforma. Paano ito isa sa katuparan at patatagalin? Suriin ang track record.
Sawa na tayo sa puro forma at salita. Ang kailangan natin ang magpapatuloy sa pagbabagong natatamasa ng sambayan ng Pilipino.
May malakas na paninindigan sa tama, hindi magtataksil sa bayan at hindi tayo ipagpapalit sa kahit anuman.
Matapat at hindi magnanakaw, hindi sarili, kundi ang interes ng bayan ang inuuna.
May political will, totoo ang serbisyo at handang ibigay ang lahat.
matugunan lamang ang mga isyu na kinakaharap at kakaharapin pa ng bansa. Bilang botante, nasa atin ang responsibilidad na ihalal ang nararapat. Isa itong desisyon para sa nakararami kung kaya't pag-isipang mabuti.
Huwag magpadala sa kasikatan at sabi-sabi. Ikaw mismo ang kumilatis. Tandaan, nakasalalay sa desisyon mo ang magiging kinabukasan ng bansa. Kaya, maging matalino. Maliban sa totoo, dapat may karanasan at kapasidad na mamuno.
Hindi ka mabibili, kaya huwag kang magpapabayad. Higyang dangal ang iyong boto.
Katuwang nyo ang SMNI sa isang malinis at patas na eleksyon. Dahil dito, siguradong balitang totoo.
Ibibigay namin sa inyo mga impormasyong tama. Tuloy ang pagbabago kahit sa pagbabalita.
Sama-sama po tayo tungo sa bagong bansa. Piliin ang magpapatuloy sa mga programang nasimulan ng administrasyon.
Ituloy.
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 Ituloy. Ituloy. Ituloy.
Ituloy.
Ituloy.
Ituloy.
Ituloy. Ituloy. Ituloy ang pagbabago.
Bumaba na ang kaso ng COVID-19 sa
mas
Western
bumaba pa
Visayas.
sa 2,000 ang bilang ng daily COVID-19 cases
ng mga lugar na napasa sa ilalim sa granular lockdown sa Metro Manila.
Katotohanan, hindi na nila nakitang tumataas ulit ang kaso, kasabay pa nito ang pagbaba palalo ng hospital utilization at
Tila magandang balita na sana ang dala ng halos sunod-sunod na pagbaba ng kaso ng COVID-19 sa bansa. Ngunit nito lamang Disyembre nang makapasok ang Omicron variant sa Pilipinas ay muling nagsimulang lumobo ang bilang ng kaso ng COVID-19 sa bansa. Kung kaya't mapapansing bilang lang ang mga taong makikita sa mga establishmento, pasyalan at iba pang mga lugar bilang pag-iingat. At dahil nga sa sitwasyong ito, may posibilidad ring madamay ang mga kaganapan sa mundo ng politika. Lalo na sa araw ng halalan kung saan ay hindi malayong maiiwasan na magtipon-tipon ang mga tao upang bumoto. Kung patuloy na tataas ang kaso ng COVID-19, papayag ba kayong ipagpaliban muna ang eleksyon?
Depende na po na sa gobyerno yan. Nasa gobyerno na yan, wala na po sa amin yan.
Pwede rin hindi muna, postpone muna natin ng para maiwasan yung pagdami ng hawahan. Kasi nga, di ba, pupunta doon sa hindi mo malaman kung sino yung nandoon.
Nagbabalik po ang SMNI Presidential Debate 2022. At sa ating pagpapatuloy, ang magtatanong naman po ngayon ay ang Chairman and CEO of the Manila Times, Mr. Dante Clink-Ang II. Mr. Ang, go ahead.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Professor Carlos started us off with a foreign policy question, and I'd like to ask something similar where it converges with gut issues. The public discourse on the West Philippine Sea often glosses over the interests of the smallest stakeholders. It was refreshing to hear several candidates for president mention the need to allow Filipinos to fish in the disputed areas, but we have not heard specifics. The concern for our fisherfolk seems to be growing on a larger audience, particularly the young voters, as evidenced by the release just days ago of a music video featuring the rock band Sponge Cola and singer Karil. If elected president, how will you look after the interests of small fishermen who are occasionally harassed by foreign vessels and often crowded out in the controversial area by fishing boats from countries with competing territorial claims like Vietnam, Taiwan, and of course, China?
The first candidate to answer this question is Secretary Ernie Abella.
All right. The fisher folk would come under the agri-powerhouse. And in the same way that we have promised that we seek to provide as much support as we can, we'd also like to do the same thing for fisher folk. One of the things that has been proposed is that they be accompanied by our, for CGs, white chips, that sort of thing. But on the other hand, first and foremost, maybe what we'd like to do is, we're planning to set up a board of agricultural investment who could probably bridge conversation with this competing interests with Vietnam, let's say, or China, so that we can come to some sort of an agreement. We can have a conversation and allow them to be able to fish peaceably. We'd like to begin first by bridging those gaps between countries and not just allow tensions to fester on the sea, on the waters, so to speak. So we'd like to be able to first reach out economically, reach out diplomatically, and work out some sort of a system, some sort of a code of conduct to be able to handle that. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Abella. Same question to Calio de Guzman.
Malaking problema talaga yung ginagawa ng China dito sa ating mga mangingisda, no? At ang kailangan talaga natin ay hindi naman natin kayang labanan, girahin yung China dahil sa klase ng inabot ng ating military capacity. Tingin ko dapat gamitin natin yung panalo natin sa International Tribunal at kakampihin natin yung mga iba pang mga hinaharas ng China dito sa Southeast Asia para itulak yung mga bansa na signatory dito sa UNCLOS na sawayin, pigilan itong China sa kanyang ginagawang pangaharas dito sa ating mga mangingisda na hindi pinapayagan. At gamitin natin, siguro economic diplomacy gamitin natin para i-pressure yung China na mapayagan o makapaghingisda yung ating mga mangingisda dito sa West Philippine Sea. Ito'y atin, dapat ito'y inirerespeto ng China bilang isang member din o signatories ng UNCLOS para na sa ganun ay magkaroon tayo ng laya na makapangisda. At dagdagan natin ng Coast Guard o Navy dyan para protektahan ang ating mga mangingisda.
Okay, thank you, Calio D. On the same question, Secretary Gonzales.
Nakakalungkot ka na naiipit ang ating mga maliliit na mga isda sa napakalaking issue. Ating hinaharap na sigalot sa China. Kaya tingin ko, dahil malaking usapin yan, para wag lang mapunta sa panganib ng ating mga maliliit na mga isda na pupunta sa teritoryo in dispute today, medyo tulungan na muna natin ang gobyerno para wag sila magutom. In the meantime, kailangan ay suriin nating mabuti ang nangyayaring sigalot sa West Philippine Sea. Iyan talaga ang ugat ng suliranin ng maliliit nating mga isda. Huwag nating ipatong sa balikat ng mga maliliit ang malaking problema na hinaharap ng bansa. Tutulungan natin sila economically. Ilalabas natin sila sa panganib. Pero haharapin natin ang China. Ang nakikita ko lang sa usapin na ito, para bang nawalan ng respeto ang bansang China sa atin. Kaya kung tayo kikilos, uunahin natin ang pagbibigay ng respeto sa ating bansa. Kung tayo makikipag-usap, dapat nire-respeto tayo. Kung wala yan, mahirap makipag-usap. Kaya ang unang aksyon, respeto para sa atin. May programa tayo para dyan.
Thank you, Secretary Gonzales. Senator Marcos.
Marami talaga tayong issue, hindi lamang sa conflicting camps sa gitna ng Pilipinas at saka China. Kaya't ngayon lang ang nakita kong national election na naging issue ang West Philippine Sea or ang foreign policy. At sa palagay ko, sa dami ng ating kailangan na ayusin sa ating pagsasama, sa pagkaalyansa natin sa China, ay unahin natin ito. Ito ang pinakauna na dapat natin simulaan, na makabalik ang mga mangingisda doon sa kanilang palaisdaan na matagal na ginagamit, na daan-daang taon na. siguro naman may papaliwanag natin sa China na ang mga bangka ay hindi naman military threat yan sa kanila. Bakit sila maglalagay ng warship doon? Ngunit kailangan natin magresponde. Kung maulit yung nangyari noon, tayo magpadala naman tayo ng Navy o kahit na Coast Guard para merong military presence, meron tayong presence of the state na nandoon, na nasa lugar na yun. Pangalawa, puntahan natin ang ASEAN at magpatulong tayo sa ASEAN. Dahil ang ASEAN ay meron din binubuo na code of conduct para sa ASEAN at saka sa China, at sana maipasa na yan. Punta pati tayo sa UN. At magpadala tayo ng delegation sa Beijing para kausapin ang Presidente Xi at sasabihin paano ba natin ayusin ito at paano ba natin gagawin para hindi na maulit itong nangyari sa nakaraan.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. Mr. Ang, any follow-up questions?
Yes, the question is what specific policies you will adopt. You know, and Senator Marcos, you mentioned in the interview you had with DZRH and the Manila Times earlier that you wanted to use diplomacy over military solutions. I mean, are you changing that policy now?
No.
And in that same interview, Cagliodi was saying that he wanted to make the West Philippine Sea a zone of peace. And now he's talking about possibly escalating the situation in that area. It's undeniably that we have to deal with China. The question is, as President, how will you do it?
No, the reason I spoke about putting a military presence there is so that the government, the Republic of the Philippines, has a presence there to show to China that we are defending what we consider our territorial waters. And that is not for them to go there to fire upon the Chinese vessels, but merely to make their presence felt so that the Chinese know we are aware of what they are doing, we do not agree with what they are doing, and we carry on with our diplomatic back channel, side channel, whatever way we can do to fix the problem and make us have a system so that we no longer have this problem again.
Cagliodi, you want to? I mentioned that you mentioned in that question.
Tama ka. Talagang ang aking programa talaga ay i-convert itong West Philippine Sea kasi malawak na usapin nito. I-convert itong West Philippine Sea into ay economic zone at hindi war zone. Kaya dapat ito'y mag-coordinate yung lahat ng mga claimants na sa mga teritoryo dito sa South China Sea o West Philippine Sea na magkasundo at magsama-sama para hindi para makipaggera sa China, kundi dapat ipakita sa China yung pagkakaisa ng mga bansang ito. At tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, dapat ay obligahin o kausapin yung lahat ng signatory doon sa UNCLOS na may nagkasundo sa ganung patakaran na igalang, irespeto ng China yung kanilang mga pinirmahan. Nasa ganon ay huwag tigilan niya yung kanyang panghaharas o panglalamang dito sa mga bansa dito sa West Philippine Sea.
One follow-up question, Karen.
Of course, Mr. Ang.
This one's directed at first to Secretary Norberto Gonzales, and I'd like you to wear your former hat as Defense Secretary, sir. And in a previous editorial we have written in the Manila Times, I have written, we've quoted the Philippine Council for Foreign Relations, specifically the chairman, Rafi Alunan, who said that in his observation, those who are crowded out from fishing in that area, these fishermen often turn to alternative means of livelihood, primarily piracy and who knows what, probably smuggling. Do you have similar observations, and what policy prescriptions would you have to address that specific issue?
I think first thing, we have to make clear to China that we cannot be pulled into an argument that is superficial to the real question in the area. They're trying to provide us with an emotional event or activity that our small fisher folks are not able to fish. Do you know what China is doing behind this? They're actually selling this fish as what they call as some kind of a fish for nationalism. Sinasabi nila na itong mga isda na ito dapat binabayaran ng mas mahal kasi ito ay nahuhuli sa isang lugar na ipinagtatanggol natin. They're making this issue. They're using our fisher folks to make this issue as simplistic as an issue of fisher folks not being able to fish in their area that is theirs. If I will be given a time, I'll add a little more.
Well, sabi niyo po may programa kayo. Pwede po ba natin tumbukin in a few seconds? Ano po ba yung programa na yan?
Alam mo na wala ng respeto ang ibang bansa sa atin. Akala nila nabibili tayo, pwede tayong laro-laruin. Kailangan magpakita tayo ng kaunting, hindi para makipaggera. I was advocating national mobilization. What does this mean? Our young people should be trained for whatever exigency. There are signs that China might tempt us. Kasi alam natin ang China ayaw ng gera. Pero pagka territory ang question, nakikipaggera sila. Tinatanggap natin, mahal ng China ang kanilang bansa. Handa silang makipaggera kung kinakailangan para sa teritoryo. Dapat nating ipakita bilang bansa na kaya nating gawin yan. Mahal natin ang ating bayan. Handa rin tayong tumindig. Mahina tayo, pero kailangan magsanay.
Any reactions from our candidates? Secretary Ernie.
Yes. In this matter, I think we should continue to examine the COC ASEAN +1. The ASEAN +1 conversations with China, and in order to be able to address these things diplomatically before we engage in anything more drastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Ernie. Senator Marcos.
Yes, and furthermore, I think, as I said, that this is not something that that we should consider as isolated from the general problem or the general discussions that we are having with the People's Republic. It should be the first part, in my view, because what we are, as Filipinos, we are most concerned at this moment, the immediate concern, na makabalik ang mga mangingisda dun sa kanilang palisdaan. Yun ang unahin natin. Ngayon, pag nakahanap tayo ng kasunduan sa People's Republic of China, ay siguro baka nasimulaan na natin ang pag-uusap tungkol sa West Philippine Sea. Dahil kung nasabi natin, amin yan, at tumanggap sila, umpisa na yan. Diyan tayo magsisimula at dahan-dahanin natin itong problema na meron tayo sa China.
Thank you. More reaction from Calyodi.
Tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, malalim yung dahilan ng China, yung pagiging aggressive niya sa pagpunta dito sa West Philippine Sea, pagsakop sa ating mga teritoryo. Hindi lang yan, dagdag na lang yung usapin ng pangingisda. Ang totoong dahilan ay yung presence ng Amerika dito, yung mga aircraft carrier niya dito. At yun ang gusto niyang proteksyonan, yung kanyang sariling bansa. Kaya yun ang problem kapag tayo kumampi, either sa Amerika o sa China, ay mayayari tayo, maiipit tayo sa kita dahil ito'y banggaan nilang dalawa.
Thank you, Calyodi. Are there any further reactions from our candidates or rebuttals?
Masasabi ko lang na huwag natin payagan.
Yes, Secretary Gonzales.
Masasabi ko lang na huwag natin payagan na gamitin yung maliliit natin sa mga malalaking usapin. Hindi malaking gastos. At masasabi ko, matutuwa ang ating mga maliliit ang mga isda na pumupunta doon kung bibigyan sila natin ng ibang opportunities economically. At pwedeng paliwanagan ng ating mga isda na ito usapin ng bayan natin. Kaya huwag muna kayong mag-isda dyan. Huwag kayong paggamit. Kasi ginagamit ang issue nito para takpan ang tunay na malaking issue sa West Philippine Sea.
We have a follow-up question from Professor Clarita Carlos.
Yes, there is no doubt that what is being fought over here is fish, isda. And so there is also no doubt that the food security of China cannot be at the expense of the food insecurity of the rest of us. Now, let's move away from the pseudo-militaristic perspectives that some of you have noted earlier. And how about thinking about a regional fishing agreement, which is along the lines that Mr. Abella talked about a while back? The reason why I talked about that is, well, there's a personal reason because I'm writing a book on regional fishing agreement. And since any one of you will become the President of the Republic of the Philippines, I was wondering if it is worth writing that book on a regional fishing agreement.
Why not?
Who wants to take on that question and statement
if
first?
I may,
Senator Marcos.
I beg to differ that this is about fish. It is not about fish, in my view. It is about territorial waters, and that when we have these 200 Chinese boats coming and blocking our fishermen, it is to assert their claim that this is part of their territorial water. And that is why you cannot separate the problems that we're having with the fishermen from the larger problem that we are having in our conflicting claims with China, and for that matter, for other countries in ASEAN. And that's why we have to look at it as maybe an opening. I always mention this, that we have to try every single way we can. And I remind everyone that China and the United States came together because of ping pong. And who would have thought that that's where it would start? Who knows where our coming together will start?
But isn't that related, Mr. Marcos, to my earlier question about the Quad? You know, if you have a whole array of, militia there, wanting to take over the whole of the contested South China Sea, shouldn't you lean on the Quad as a collective security arrangement?
No, because that is a military solution, and that proposes a military solution. And I do not think we want a military solution because we simply do not want a war. I do not think China wants a war. I do not think the United States wants a war. The Philippines certainly does not want a war.
Well, but Mr. Gonzales just said that China only recognizes naked power. So what are we talking about?
I don't think that is the method for us to come to an agreement with the People's Republic of China. There are three ways to gain territory. One is upon agreement with arbitration by an international body, agreement of two or more parties. Number two is war. And number three is bilateral agreement. We're left only, I think, with bilateral agreement, and that's what we should pursue.
Thank you.
Secretary Gonzales wants to react.
Precisely what Dr. Carlos says. The presence of the superpowers in our region will actually prevent war. That is an opening for us to gain something that we have lost. And this is respect of other nations. You know, we may have our army may be weak in terms of equipment, but our nation is rich in the hearts of young people who can show to the world that are willing to stand if challenged. I do not think there will be war. As Dr. Carr said, the superpowers are there. China will not dare challenge that. That's a beautiful situation in our area of the world today. Let's take advantage of this. Let us show that our young people can do something.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Gonzales. Any reaction or rebuttal from our candidates?
I would still go back to having a multilateral relationship regarding that matter. So I would still refer back to ASEAN plus China. ASEAN, it's a conversation that we need to settle. And because, you know, as we all know, our neighbor is sensitive to international opinion.
Any reactions? Secretary Gonzales again?
I agree with ASEAN.
ASEAN plus one, yeah.
ASEAN plus one? Yeah. Maybe if it's ASEAN plus one, we have to make it ASEAN 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, you know, I mean, we cannot just limit it to ASEAN plus one if we want a dialogue.
Isda muna.
Yeah. So, ASEAN, yes, because we belong to ASEAN. We need our neighbors in this business. But if we want to engage with other countries like China, then we have to, I think, to also talk to other big countries in the area. But I would like to go back to my...
Secretary, we're out of time for your reaction.
Yes.
Senator Marcos?
Yes, please. I cannot see, though, what in this formulation, but how we are going to tell our fishermen, wag muna kayo mangisda dyan. Anong hanap buhay nila? Anong kakainin nila? Kailangan natin ayusin yung problemang yan in whatever way we can. Kaya kailangan isama natin, gawing bahagi ng malaking usapan sa China, yung unahin na nga natin, yung naging lagay ng ating mga mangingisda. Doon natin simulan. Hindi malay natin. Pag nasimulan natin dyan, ay lalawak ang usapan natin at kaganda.
Thank you.
But wouldn't a legal framework called the Regional Fishing Agreement be a solution to that? Because right now what China is doing is unilaterally declaring a fishing holiday. You know, like, wow, bawal mangisda ngayon, ha? Sa susunod na buwan ka mangisda, ha? So, you know, she's setting all the rules for this contested South China Sea. So, if you were the chief architect of our foreign policy, wouldn't you want a regional fishing agreement where every country washed by the East China and the contested South China Sea are participants or members? And if I may add, and this is not to rain on the parade of Mr. Abella and Mr. Gonzalez, I don't think we should lean on ASEAN. You know, the countries which are fed by the Mekong River, I'm sure they will cotton on to China because the Mekong rises from China. Big mo sabihin, wala kang tubig sa agriculture mo sa iyong tao, and we're talking about Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar. Diba? So, yeah, to repeat, I'm not raining on your parade, but I doubt very much that we should lead on ASEAN.
Well, I think that if a fishing agreement would be included in any code of conduct that we agree with China and ASEAN. That definitely should be part of it, because it is not a problem that we are suffering by ourselves. Other members of ASEAN have the same problem, and that is why it will be critical to have a robust and effective code of conduct between ASEAN and China must include the issue of fishing rights.
Yes, that's my point. Pull the leg of China into a regional fishing agreement.
Well,
Otherwise,
they already have entered into an agreement, into a code of conduct agreement years ago.
Yeah, but they're doing bilateral.
They are trying to do it bilaterally, and that's why I think it is more to China prefers to handle these issues bilaterally between their country and another country. But I think that the multilateral approach is still going to be important. We will pursue every avenue that we can.
And Secretary Gonzalez, I can see you raising your hand, as well as Calyodi. In that order, sir. You were first, Secretary Gonzalez.
Well, I agree with the regional fishing agreement. That's very important. We can discuss that. But precisely, what the Chinese is trying to do with our small fisher folks is to actually move us away from the major issue that we are facing in the West Philippine Sea. The West Philippine Sea is about territory and about forward defense. The Chinese have been planning to establish a forward defense facility in that part of the world. Happens to be Philippines. They say it's China. We say it's ours. They are establishing a forward defense strategy, and sometimes we want, well, I will not wonder why. Calyodi knows the answer.
Speaking of Calyodi, you're next.
Tingin ko talagang posible at magkakasundo doon sa regional agreement para doon sa karapatan ng bawat isa na mangisda. As long as hindi tayo manging-question doon sa pangangamkam ng teritoryo ng China. Pero once na tinuloy-tuloy natin ang ating question sa pangangamkam ng teritoryo ng China dito sa West Philippine Sea, hindi sila napapayag. Dahil yun ang pinaka-importante sa kanila. Ang importante sa kanila ay makapagtayo ng base militar diyan sa lugar na yan para i-counter ang move ng US, ng Australia, ng Japan, na sinisirkel, pakaramdam ng China, sinisirkel siya. Kaya gumagawa siya ng paraan para mapigilan ang pagkukordon ng US at ng mga allied niya sa China. Pero kung peacing lang, tingin ko aabot doon. Pero huwag kang makikialam doon sa kanyang ginagawa.
Thank you, Calio Adi.